Good morning, everyone. I'd like to dedicate today's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomis Rabinowitz, Shalamas Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. We are in Mishna Chala, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishna Vav, Mishna 6. Now, in the previous Mishnah, we had a halacha that if you have a batter that is cooked, there'll be an obligation for challah. If it's either a regular dough, even if it's cooked, or it's a batter but it's baked, it would have an obligation for challah. So this discussion continues in today's Mishnah. Ha-me'isa. Me'isa is a bread that is made by pouring flour into hot water and then baking the mixture. So you pour the flour into the water, the flour gets cooked, and then it's baked. Bei Shammai Paitrin, Beis Hillel mechayvin. Beis Shammai exempt a person from having to separate challah from this me'isa. Beis Hillel obligate. That would mean, according to Beis Shammai, even though it's baked at the end, but since it was first cooked, that will exempt this kind of a dough, this kind of a bread, from separating challah from it. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, obligate. That means, according to Beis Hillel, at the end of the day, you baked it. Therefore, it's considered a bread, a regular bread. You have to separate challah from it. Now, here in the notes brought down a very interesting point, and that is that let's just analyze this case a little bit, this me'isa. You're taking the flour, you're pouring into boiling water, but it forms a dough. And at the end of the day, you're baking that dough. So why would there be any kind of question as to whether challah has to be taken or not? We said if it's a dough, even if it's not baked, that you have to separate challah. And here it's becoming a dough and it's going to be baked. So what's the problem with the fact that it got cooked beforehand? I mean, it became a dough. But the way the explanation is given is that actually the cooking process seems to take place before it becomes a dough. Here, however, the cooking took place before the dough was finished. So it maybe made it to some kind of a dough, but the cooking process took place before the dough was finished. That means it was cooked before it was a dough. So it's really like a batter that was cooked. Now, the question is, though, well, at the end it was baked also, so that make a difference. So that's where the machlekes here, that's where the argument takes place. Beis Shammai say it's still exempt, because since it was cooked beforehand, that now that's not considered bread anymore. It was cooked before it became a dough, therefore it's not called bread, even though it's baked afterwards. And Beis Hillel would say, no, it is considered, since it's baked at the end, it is considered a bread. It's considered bread. As we said yesterday, the obligation of challah comes from something called bread. And these kinds of what we refer to as breads may not fit into the category of what's considered bread. And here the argument is that although it seems to start off before it's baked, it's cooked, and it's cooked before it becomes a dough. So by the time you've made this dough into something, it's already cooked. One might think that therefore baking it afterwards isn't going to help. And that's the machlekes. Beis Shammai say it doesn't help. It's still not considered bread. While Beis Hillel say that it is. Now, the next case of the Mishnah, which is going to sound contradictory to the first case that we just said. Ha-chalita. Chalita is also a bread that is baked, but how is this bread made? It's a bread made by pouring hot water onto flour and then baking it. That's what you do by chalita. Chalita is you got the flour, you pour the hot water onto the flour, and then you're going to go ahead and bake it. My understanding is you're going to pour the hot water onto the flour, make it into a dough, and then bake it. All right. So what's the halacha here? Beis Shammai mechayvin. Here, Beis Shammai obligate this bread in challah, because even though it was cooked before, it was baked. Beis Hillel paitr, Beis Hillel exempt. Beis Hillel are saying, no, being that it was cooked before, baking it afterwards is not going to help. And therefore, there's no obligation. It's not going to turn into a bread. And therefore, there's no obligation for challah. So here, by the chalita, so before by the me'isa, it was Beis Shammai exempting from challah and Beis Hillel obligating. which by the and that's the me'isa. That is where you pour the flour into the hot water. The chalita, where you pour the hot water onto the flour, here Beis Shammai say you gotta separate challah, Beis Hillel say you don't. And the question is obvious. There's really no difference between them. The only difference between them is the flour going into the water or is the water going into the flour? But it's the same situation. It's getting cooked first before it became a dough, and then it's being baked. So there should be no difference between them. Why do we find that the opinions switch? And therefore, the Bartanura brings down from the Gemara in Pesachim that actually it's not a contradiction. It's actually two versions of the same argument. The Mishnah is kind of taking parts of each. But in all actuality, there is a question. There was a question as to what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel actually held, meaning Me'isa and Chalita are the same thing. There was one version of the argument where Beis Shammai exempted and Beis Hillel obligated, and that was by both. And there was another version where Beis Shammai obligated and Beis Hillel exempted, and again, it's by both. The Mishnah, for some reason, decided to take each example and, kind of separate it. Yeah, give an example of one bread with the argument and another bread with the argument. And that was where the Mishnah kind of was laying out this argument and saying that it was really an argument about what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel hold. Why the Mishnah did it this way, that's a separate question. But that's how the Gemara explains the Mishnah. Each example is kind of meant to break up the argument to say, well, there's one version of the argument this way, there's a version of the argument that way. But the argument is by both these breads, because they're really exactly the same thing. Okay, the Mishnah continues. Chalois toida rekike nazir, the loaves of the Thanksgiving offering and the wafers of the nazir. If a person has to bring what's called a carbon toida, a Thanksgiving offering, he was very ill. He traveled over the sea. Whatever situation it is, the dangerous situation he got out of, that would obligate to bring a carbon toda, a Thanksgiving offering. There are a number of different types of loaves of bread that a person bringing carbon toda has to bring. If a person becomes a nazir is a certain type of vow which he forbids himself. Person forbid by saying he's a nazir. Can't cut his hair, can't drink wine, can't come into contact with the contamination of a dead body. And he finishes now, he accepts upon himself to be a nazir for whatever amount of time. When his term of being a nazir is complete, he also brings a set of sacrifices. And with those sacrifices, he brings, again, different types of breads. So that's the discussion here. Discussion in our Mishnah now is someone who is baking those breads, either for his carbon toida, somebody's baking breads for a carbon toida or for the completion of the term of being a nazir. The question is going to be, do those loaves, do you have to separate challah from them? Regular loaves, no discussion, nothing out of the ordinary. They're regular breads. They're made the regular way they're supposed to be made. The question is, will there be an obligation of challah here? Now, the Mishnah, the wording of the Mishnah is chalois toida, that means the loaves of the Thanksgiving offering, or rikike nazir, and the wafer, the thin breads of a nazir. It seems to be saying, it's talking about the loaves by the nazir, and the wafers the loaves by the toda, and the wafers by the nazir. The truth is that there are both types when you give a Thanksgiving offering, and there are both types when a nazir completes his being a nazir. Why it only took each example why it only mentioned the chalos by the toida and the wafers by the nazir, that's a discussion in the commentaries. But it doesn't mean to say that this discussion is only referring to these types of breads, because both types were by both cases. So here we have again the breads of the toida, the breads of the nazir, asan la'atzmai. If these were made for himself, he has to make a carbon toida, or here's a nazir, and he's making the breads for himself, pater. He will be exempt from separating challah. Why is that? Because anything that belongs to hektish, anything that has been sanctified and consecrated to be considered part of the Beis Hamikdash, to belong to the Beis Hamikdash, to be considered, so to speak, the property of its divine property, there is no obligation to separate challah. So if you sanctify something and you've given it the sanctity that now it goes to the Beis HaMikdash, it belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, it's as described here, divine property, there's no obligation for separating challah, and that is what these breads are seen as. Now, what is interesting is that when these breads are baked, they're not hektish yet. You sanctify them later when you're ready to bring them. So really, they're not hektish now when they're baked. However, being that that is where they are heading, that is what they got. That's what they're meant to be for. They're meant to be sanctified. Therefore, they're considered already sanctified, as if they're sanctified and exempt from challah. Limkar bashuk. But let's say you're not baking it for yourself. You're baking it for the market. That means there are people who are looking for breads for their carbon tada and breads, and Nazirim and a Nazir looking for breads for his sacrifice. Not everybody makes it themselves. They try to find others who make them. So if you made them to sell to these people, then we say chayav, then we say you're liable. You have to separate challah. Now, if you're baking these things for a Nazir, for a Toda, so that means, again, they are designated for this mitzvah, and they will eventually become hektish, become the property of the Beis HaMikdash. So why is it any different when you do it for yourself or when you do it for others? Either way, you're baking them for those purposes. They will become hektish. Both of them are the same in that way. Why for yourself are you exempt, but for others you're obligated? And the explanation that's given is because when you go to the marketplace and you sell these breads, you don't know if you're able to sell all of them. Whatever is left over, you're going to take it for yourself. So being that there is that possibility that they won't land up being sanctified, because they won't be land up being used by the Nazir or by the person who's doing the carbon taida, therefore they are not yet considered like hektish, because it's not clear it's going to get that. It's going to get to that point, and therefore they consider regular doughs, and you have to separate challah from them. Okay, we are in the laws of Lashon Harah, Klal Ches, chapter 8, in the Chavetz Chaim, Seif Ches, paragraph 8. V'da, and no, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Mashayesh Oimrim, there are those that say, the Mutter L'Saper Lashon Harah al Bali Machlekes. There is this saying, there is this concept, this rule, that it is permitted to speak Lashon Harah on people who are involved in a quarrel. Quarreling is clearly a very bad thing. And there are those who say people are involved in a quarrel, you can speak Lashon Harah about them. What does that mean? Dafka, this is only, says the Chavetz Chaim, who roya shal yedei sheyigal lefnei anoshim es goydol tarmisam bazeh ha'inyan, v'yurshay nadin imam b'tach zeh tushpas ha'machlokes. This is only if you see that by revealing to other people how wrong one or both sides are in this machlekes, in this argument, meaning they're really wrong in getting in their side, they're wrong, they're absolutely wrong. And they're wrongly involved in this dispute. And somehow, because of that, by telling it to others, that will now cause the conflict, the quarrel to end. Okay, by seeing that the people, that somebody here is really wrong, these people maybe will get involved and be able to stop the argument. Then you can go ahead and basically go to others and say that this person involved in the argument is wrong. But otherwise, meaning it's not going to help. No difference whether we're talking about people out in a quarrel and other things. It'll be Lashon Harah. There's no point of saying it over. And in a situation where it is permissible to speak Lashon Harah about people involved in a quarrel, it has to meet the following conditions. One, sha'adavarim sha'yadan huskam b'daito shem bali machlokes yedamei atzma v'liyismach b'zal shmiya me'acherim l'shenisbar le'shu emes. You are taking license to speak Lashon Harah because of the fact that one or both of them are having a quarrel, are in conflict for the wrong reasons. You have to know those reasons yourself. That means you have to know them, you've seen them, you recognize them to yourself, not because you're just relying on others, unless after others told you, you went and you clarified. But it has to be clear and known to you that they are bali machlokes, which means they're quarrelsome, meaning they're involved in a quarrel that they shouldn't be involved in. Bays, again, there can be nothing personal involved in why you're speaking against this people. It has to be, again, for the purpose of trying to quiet the quarrel. Gimel, let's say if you have another way of trying to stop this quarrel without having to speak about them, meaning you're going over to others and telling others about this quarrel. Go to the people involved directly. If you can do that and through that stop the conflict, clearly you have to do that first. If you have the ability to do that, to go into them and get involved, to speak to them personally and stop the quarrel, then you have no permission to speak Lashon Harah. Unless you're afraid that if you're going to start rebuking them, if the people involved in the quarrel would know that you're not, you don't agree with them, then somehow or another they'll be able to undo your plan of trying to settle this quarrel. And then you'll be stuck. Okay, meaning the Chavetz Chaim is saying if you can approach these people, and there's a possibility that's going to work, got to do that first. Unless if when you approach the people, they sense that you're not on their side, they will go and make sure that you wouldn't, that by, let's say, telling somehow or another, they would now do something that would undo anything that afterwards you could do to speak to other people about it. Which means the only option you have really is to go to other people first, because if you go to the people involved in the quarrel first, they'll undermine anything you try to do in the future about this. Then we say you go to the other people, then you can go to other people first. But when you get involved in this, you have to think it through very well. And don't be so quick to go ahead and say to others that this side is wrong. This side is involved in a quarrel that they shouldn't be involved in. You have to think through very well who are the ones here that are really in the wrong. And if he has no way of being able to clarify that, sit back, don't do anything, stay out of it. Don't get involved. Don't go telling other people about it because of the fact that, somehow or another they'll stop the quarrel. Before you can go to other people and say somebody is wrong involved in the quarrel, you got to be sure of it. If you're not sure of it, you have to stay out of it. Have a wonderful day.